I think I'm going to go ahead and just get us started here. First of all, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. Make sure we're in the right part of the world. You've joined Group Basis, and we're going to talk about the top 6 things that you need to know about SAP Security and Compliancy. And I'm going to ask anybody that has the ability as a visitor today, if you've got the ability to put us in a mute mode, that would be helpful. It'll minimize any background distractions that there might be. So for those of you that do not know Group Basis, our short overview is that we are the middleware stack experts. So if you've got an SAP environment, you may be looking at 7x24 monitoring, basis administration. We also do hosting. We help with migrations, upgrades of ECC, and related support services. Our organization is all based in Wisconsin, and our non-blended rate of experience is 8 years, and so that means that we don't take somebody who's been doing this for 8 years and then somebody else for 2 weeks and say it's 4. Our average year of experience is 8 years or more, except in our security practice. And in that space, we have 15-plus years of experience for each of the folks that's part of our team in that space. My name's Janelle Rice. I'm going to be the host and the facilitator of our call today, and Judy Thompson is on the phone with me. Judy's been in the security space for 15 years, and the last 5 years plus she's also been in support of GRC. She's helped several organizations meet their goals in not only crafting an approach, but then also other organizations she's been mentoring so that their organizations can get secure and then also stay that way. Today we're going to talk about 6 key areas. The first is vulnerabilities, audits, avoiding internal threats, SAP license compliance, GRC, and then IPOs as part of that conversation. So I think at this point we'll go ahead and get started. We've got somebody out there who I can hear some background noise on. If there's a way to ask our visitors to mute us, that would be terrific. First, where do threats come from? Judy, can you talk to us a little bit more about the challenges that impact SAP in that space?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. They come from actually 3 areas. The first two are obvious, the internal and external, and then there's a third. So we'll start with internal, and typically having a person on your team who has too much access. And it might have been given to them, and that's an SAP, as well as possibly other areas. It may have been given to them a long time ago during an upgrade when roles were loosely defined so the company could continue their business during an upgrade. And then they might have retained that access or they may have retained the access from a previous position and then were moved to a new area or went through an organizational reorganization and it was never trued up. The classic example is where a person moves from accounts receivable to accounts payable and retains access for both due to loose process and controls. They're able to write themselves checks or write checks to a partner in crime, and this is similar to what happened with the Wisconsin Department of Corrections case last year. Those of you who aren't familiar, this is exactly what happened. The access was loose and they were able to, they are now serving some time, but they were able to do this. Now for external, and this is really a tough one because it has to be, the process in getting these correct can be a little bit long, but our external threats, external meaning coming out of SAP or even going into SAP from an external resource. First one would be with the remote function calls or RFCs. And this is a SAP user ID that is used to communicate internally and externally and can be intercepted by an external source. A hacker could ride on that ID, and if they're able to crack the password, which there are tools to do so, they'll be able to get right into your system with no problem at all. And these user IDs usually are given very wide access, so they could pretty much do anything they want. And the third one is the one we don't really want to think about and the most malicious, and that's a disgruntled employee. And The danger here is not having that employee's access disabled immediately, whether it be from an LDAP environment, whether it be from a database environment. Group Basis does have some tools that can demonstrate some of the dangers external to SAP, as well as external to the entire landscape. So that should be enough said about the internal, external, and others. Janelle?
Thank you, Judy.
Mm-hmm.
Judy, can you walk us through the things that are routinely giving organizations some challenges in the audit area, and who's impacted by audits and why?
Certainly. The best solutions and process to get through an audit is always preventative. And here are some actions that will help. In the interest of being prepared, privately owned companies can use some form of governance, risk, and compliance tools for controls in this area as a best practice. I've heard of some companies having as simple a process as a spreadsheet with a set of rules that they have to check the access by. It's better than nothing. It's not the best, but it's better than nothing. It must be done as a vetting process prior to going public. For publicly held companies, segregations, Sarbanes-Oxley compliance and segregation of duties is mandatory, ensuring that the process of reviewing access on a scheduled basis, such as monthly or weekly, so your business owners would take a look at a report, for instance, of everybody's access, what's changed, what hasn't changed, and it would prevent any surprises that are uncovered by the auditors since the issue would have been dealt with already. So it's a proactive approach. And then take a look at your internal SAP roles or access. The areas of interest to an auditor are the roles that can use data modification permissions or change, add, or delete. And read-only permissions are not as high unless it's HR or financial, and of course you want to be selective about that. It's important also to have a team approach with your end-user departments so that each area, such as sales roles, have the correct access to their needs. So basically, the IT SAP Security Department really doesn't have anything other than the technical expertise. They don't have the functional expertise. Your business process owners or somebody delegated as a role owner would be the person to review these reports. And in addition to that, the other thing that you want to that I found auditors look for is a lot of times the basis team also is given SAP security tasks, but it can be a big conflict and risk for a company. Basis teams are usually not intimately involved with the details of example sales, again, as the functional person would be. And they would not know what transaction codes in SAP would cause a conflict. So if they're assigning codes to someone, they probably will provide more access than they needed to assure that the person can do their job. Optimally secure access is a business process which involves an owner from the functional area working with IT to find the best access and balance. Using a governance, risk, and compliance tool where access is run through a predetermined rule set to see what and if there are any conflicts is always best practice. Janelle?
So, if I can kind of put a plug in here for the next session. Our next session, what we find is that the whole conversation about defining roles can be, in and of itself, somewhat complex. Where should the basis team really provide capabilities? Where do they need to partner with a functional team? Ultimately, it has an opportunity to be a win-win, but a lot of times it's a lose-lose because the basis team either is giving too little access or too much access. There's consequences to both. If you've got too little access, then, for example, the sales team is coming back and they're unhappy because they don't have the ability to do their job anymore. If you give them too much access, well, then you kind of have defeated the purpose of of having the structure in place. And so you'll actually see that our next session in the future is going to spend a little bit more time on this subject. Software. Avoid the lose-lose. This is one of those things that makes most SAP customers pretty frustrated. They feel like they're spending a lot of money for licensing, but they don't necessarily feel like they've got their arms around what they own and what they really need. Judy, can you talk to us about the resources that are out there to help with this?
Sure, Janelle. Actually, to paraphrase a previous IT leader that I know, this is what he used to say. Every year when the SAP budget comes up, I can see how much this costs, but what am I getting for my money? Okay, and it's real difficult to define to upper, sometimes way upper management, like the CEO, what exactly this money that you're spending on SAP licenses is going for. At group basis, we have tools that we use to make sure that you have the right licenses for the right people. What license types do you have versus what your end user are really accessing routinely? You could be paying twice the money per user if they are accessing different areas. For instance, you have an access for ERP or ECC system. In addition to that, they use the SRM or CRM systems, as well as Global Trade Services, GTS. It could potentially be counted twice if you're not using the right tools, and you could be charged twice for one license, which is not good. Then there are second-level questions about licensing, including is the user only doing display? Are they actually updating or modifying? And these are some examples for your end-user licenses. The final license and the most expensive license for SAP is your developer license. And with the developer license, you want to make sure that any contractor or anyone who has been there as a developer and has left, that their licenses and user IDs, all that are removed. Because if they're not, you may be paying for a very hefty license. Janelle?
So it sounds like it could be adding insult to injury. So between the reorganizations that can happen with the company, we want to make sure that you're not giving them, again, that dual access that we talked about earlier, but then the licensing as well. So not only could they get in, but then you could be either paying for a license that's no longer needed and perhaps redeployed to another area. Are you ready for SOX or considering an organizational change? Judy, this is everybody's favorite subject. I think it's tied in first place with GRC. Can you talk to us about who needs to consider SOX and why they need to do that?
Surely. As we talked about earlier, Sarbanes-Oxley, SOX, using the GRC tools, governance, risk, and compliance tools, is best practice. If you're not publicly traded and it's mandatory if you're either public or going public, there should be and I'm just going to go over what the basic concept of governance, risk, and compliance are for anyone who is interested in looking or pursuing getting a rule set. And the rule set is a set of rules that's usually supplied by either SAP will supply a rule set or any other tool should have a rule set that comes along with it. And these are standard transactions or standard capabilities that are usually done in the finance area. There should be a rule set to what people have access to in what areas, and this is what helps good fences and good role structure. The one that's less obvious is you might be a large company with different divisions, and you have internal locations where you don't want, for example, Germany looking at U.S. operations or Division A looking at Division B and that kind of thing. This one kind of catches organizations by surprise, and they might have been privately held, but then a public company offers to purchase them or part of them, and they need to scramble and go through this exercise. And so, they've got to come up with a rule set. They've got to come up with mitigating controls, which are controls that tell the auditors that you are willing to take the risk. So you have somebody in Italy that does all the accounting, accounts payable, accounts receivable, invoicing, controller, person with many hats. That person is going to show up with Sarbanes-Oxley violations all over the place. And what we do with that is that we have a set of mitigating rules saying, okay, if they're in Italy and they do all this stuff, I'm willing to take that risk as a company because they have a lot of functionality to their job. So We find that it's best practice that supports SAP access at a functional level. In other words, make your roles that are usually job related, functionally related. You can always add a bunch of them together to give to somebody, to give a person who has a lot of hats. And it gives you both peace of mind, but also prepares you for your future by having a solid foundation, irrespective of what your future brings. So, you know, trying to construct your roles that way will actually put you in a position where no matter where your company goes, whether it stays, whether it acquires somebody or somebody acquires it, or just you grow, these types of things will probably stay pretty solid. You know, role structure is as much as art as science and really should be tailored to the organization as its needs. So, you know, it really does depend on how the company wants to do their roles, but usually it's been my experience that doing it with the job description or functional portion in mind is usually best practice. Janelle?
Thanks, Judy. I think that we find, and you know, we certainly have all heard the stories, right? It's a complex area. There's significant consequences in not doing it correctly, and yet to some extent we hear that it's an art form as well. And so thank you for kind of walking us through the piece to give us a little better indication about what even the value as a best practice can be in that space. Judy, a lot of people would have a quick response to this question, and it's probably a little bit bolder than just a headache. Why is GRC valuable beyond just the regulatory conversation?
Yeah, Janelle, I've heard a lot of descriptions of governance, risk, and compliance in my career, but you know, it's basically a framework for which you can or cannot do to meet the functionality of a job. It actually gives you some control over what you think people are doing versus what they're doing. You know, the example I gave before about someone who transfers from accounts receivable to accounts payable, the consequence of that move may not result in having their previous access cleaned up. Again, controls. You know, having reports that tell you, you know, this person had this access, and now they have this access, and now it's going to, you know, now it's a conflict. You know, and it uses that rule set to show there's a conflict in that report, and a decision can be made whether to mitigate or accept the risk because they're filling in for somebody, or to remove that access. In the case of an international company, I went over the example of many hats before. This will help you mitigate that risk. So basically what it really does for you and for the company is give you an idea of what everybody is actually really doing based on their access, and controlling the assigning of that access, which is very important because, you know, it's not just an area that's thrown into SAP Security or whoever's doing the security for SAP and then forgotten about. It's an area that has to be maintained and overseen, so there's compliance involved. Janelle?
Judy, this has been helpful. We've all heard the war stories, and eBay has been, of course, the most recent one. We all are familiar with either some at a personal level or we've read about them in the paper. How do you protect yourself and your organization beyond the basics?
You know, that's a good point, Janelle. Most threats can be avoided by discussing, again, and I can't repeat enough, of having internal processes and external reviews. You can have external reviews of those processes using external people outside the IT team. For instance, internal audits, which is external to IT, will help with that. If you were to go and ask your team if they're doing their job, you know what the answer you'll get. The real question is not, are employees doing what they think they should be doing? The real question is, are you safe? And in order to do that, you need to manage the new vulnerabilities as a standard procedure because the threats and the patches are constantly changing. We all know this. In addition, you need to make sure that you have someone whose job is to try and break it. In other words, get the access and try to break, try to do something you're not supposed to. Many times companies outsource this, and this can be a specific to the company, and you don't want to break up a team by having somebody remove the team. If you're on the team and you know you have to break something, sometimes you're predisposed to not break it or to actually try to break it, and and it's not really broken. So you really want to try and make that external if you can. One of the leading experts in this area identified that 90% of the organizations that had exposure and were exposed actually inherited the security from one of their predecessors who was responsible for this area. The only thing worse than having this on your watch is not being responsible for it happening, but still being accountable for it. An outside audit can be a great way of knowing what you have or what you are inheriting. That having been said, always have a process in place, have a rule set, have mitigating controls to mitigate any risks, and make sure somebody external or a consultant or whoever can come in and take a look at what you've got and what people are actually using and give you some kind of an assessment. And that's how you would protect yourself. Janelle?
There are two things there that I know I'm repeating, but I think they're so important we want to highlight them. We know that our customers have good people in those roles. That's not the question. The question is if you're having, two people that sit across from each other when you do a security audit, if it's a fully vetted process, to some extent you're asking them to be in opposing roles. And, so you have to balance that against the teamwork conversation, right? And so sometimes it is beneficial to take that outside of the team, just if nothing else for that reason. But the other reason is, again, as Judy said, 90% of the time, this is coming from an industry-leading source, 90% of the time it's a problem that's inherited. So somebody who had that responsibility, part of that team, who's no longer either in that role or part of the organization, something happened on their watch. But now, for example, I'm sitting in the chair. I'm ultimately responsible for where we're at as an organization. And so even though that security issue wasn't caused by me or my team, I'm still accountable for it. 90% of the time, that's a pretty staggering number.
Janelle, that's so right, and I've seen it time after time in companies I've worked with where somebody may be contacting me for some guidance as what to do, and exactly that. I don't know how they just got it and they did a design and that's how it is, and it's things change. I mean, even rules change, so it's always good to be current.
Thanks, Judy. So we want to we're starting to obviously do a little bit of a wrap up here, but we want to share with you what we've got coming up. As you can imagine, any one of these three subjects it would take at least 20 minutes by themselves. And so what we're planning on doing in future sessions is dedicating a session to each of these subjects. So our next session is going to be about roles design, and we're going to take the 20 minutes and talk specifically about that. How do you crawl? How do you walk? How do you run? And so as we've been in this space talking about how you come in, where do you start? How do you build a team? Taking those small steps and then having them move forward. So you'll see some sessions coming up on that, a separate session on SOX and GRC. In our experience, the role design is really, as we said in the beginning, it's the good foundation. And then you lay on top of that SOX and then finally GRC. And so they each support each other along the way. And so stay tuned for those events. Hopefully you'll find one or two of them in there that are helpful to you, and you'll be able to come back and join us again. I'd like to, at this point, we want to take an opportunity just to say, thank you so much for joining us. We tried to stick to 20 minutes, and I think we're just a couple minutes after that. We just hopefully got one or two things out of this, whether they were a reminder or whether they were new things. Of course, if there's anything our team can help you with in this space, let us know. But otherwise, I'd just kind of like to open the mic up at this point and see if we've got any questions from any of the folks that joined us on the call this afternoon that we might be able to help you with. I think if we don't have any questions, you can feel free to send us an email. We'll also circle back with you. And otherwise, let us know if there's anything else that we can help you with. And we'll let you get back to your work day. Take care. Bye-bye.